Let's go!
FF7 news. Hasn't been a lot, and there also has. Because ultimately, the FF7 news came kind of like fast, and it was like, oh wow, they're talking about so much stuff. And that's effectively what it is. It's more Part 3 talk, but more solidified in what those individual elements are. And now the devs are like kind of like being really specific about it. So to top off the news today, Rebirth director Hamaguchi says that for part 3 of the FF7 trilogy, the plot has been finalized, concept has been decided, and the team is already working on it. I mean, I'd like to tell you that that's news and everyone should be excited like the game has begun production, but in all honesty, it just means that some things that were kind of in the air before that had not been completely finalized are definitely final, and they're just sort of like going forward. This game's been in development for a year, dude. At this point, like, to be completely honest, this game has been developing and already been worked on for quite a long time. And that's just because of how large of a concept it is and how much it's going to carry over from the previous game. Yeah, I'm still under the same boat that I don't think it's switching engines. I think it's going to be Unreal Engine 4. I don't think it's changing to UE5. I think we've seen plenty of UE5 games mess shit up over the past, like, you know, couple years. So there's no specific reason to want that change, much less the benefits that it gives without how much time it's going to take to learn that shit. They can't reveal that concept for the third game yet, but they want to give players experience the world from a higher perspective with the Highwind. The Highwind is going to be so integral to part 3, it's going to be nuts. So that's just more of a confirmation. He says the airship will not try to deceive people with its system, and they will take on the challenge to allow you to fly freely around the map. So that is a good point. When you talk about this stuff and you start talking about like how cool the Highwind can be, this thing could literally be a point A to point B marker, and it just goes from point A to point B. They specifically are addressing that the expectations that people have is that they do not want you to have a on-rails experience. Like, you're going to experience the game from a much higher elevation. You're going to experience the world from that elevation. When they're saying that they're allowing you to fly freely around the map, this is not a dedication to one thing or the other. I think it's more of like a promise that the Highwind is going to be so integral into the gameplay that the air, like the sky of the game, is going to have actual gameplay elements outside of just traversal. Because that's the one thing that at least FF7 Rebirth is trying to do, to put a lot of shit in its world and a lot of stuff for you to do in that world, which is great. That's fun. Did all of it hit? Not all of it hit, but there needed to be a bit more exploration. I think that's the thing, dude. Like, we need to be able to take the Highwind to areas that are obviously unexplorable. And I'll be real, one of my favorite things of FF7 Original is looking at the world map once you have the Highwind and coming to the realization that, oh, I have access to this thing now. I think I can land there. Clearly the game was like teasing you with places you could go as you were traversing that world, and you're like, oh man, I wish I could go there. Then as soon as you have an airship, you're like, oh, I can go to this weird chocobo house. Oh, I can go to these caves now. Oh, I can't go here. Oh, even though I have the airship, I'm still like landlocked by certain things. So to me, that will be imperative. Like, that's 100% imperative if we're doing FF7 Part 3 and we have full Highwind exploration. It's the relationship between literally your experience of running around the world, and now that you're up here, so what does this do for you, right? What does being up here do for you outside of potentially engaging with enemies that are aerial, all that kind of stuff? Like, the same shit happens underwater in the OG FF7. The exact same thing happens with the underground of FF7 when you're going up through all the caves under the ocean, and then you go up and you have no idea where you're at on the world map, and then bam, you're here, and it's like, oh shit, where the hell have I taken myself? Once again, FF7 Remake series has shown that they're very much interested in keeping the same feel and vibes that the first game had. And a big part of that to me is exploration and how the ocean, the land, and the sky kind of relate to each other. There's very few games overall that have that big of a, you know, combination between those three things. I'm excited. They haven't talked anything about underwater. No. Like, did you miss something? Trust me. They're not going to talk about the ocean, much less talk about under ocean, until likely like 6 months or less before the game comes out. Because ultimately, submarine shit happens much later in the game. Like, that will be halfway through FF7 Returns when it comes out, Part 3. Can't wait. I'm just ridiculously excited. There's more, though. Hamaguchi and Katase showed off alternate drastic design changes for the Mako reactor in FF7 at the G-Star panel. Katase wanted a more drastic design, saying, since it's a remake, wouldn't it be good to have more drastic silhouette? Ah ha ha, this is what always happens. the original creators are like more than willing to change shit. This always happens, dude, because like we did this already, so let's really up the ante and modernize things. Hamaguchi had too much respect for the series and was worried about its reception. They had a 2-hour discussion and settled on the more faithful design. Look at this weird looking fucking thing. What the hell? No, I hate this. I really don't. It looks weird. It looks like a funky volcano. They came up with a drastic Mako reactor design that Kitase would have imagined. I'm so glad they didn't go with that. Kitase and Hamaguchi explained what the concept slash theme was for each of the FF7 games so far. And with the OG Final Fantasy VII, it's obviously life, which is pretty conclusive. FF7 Remake, it's reunion. It's like nostalgic, but it's new. FF7 Rebirth was bonds, and yeah, the bond between characters, and clearly the bonds that we're making with the world and the characters in that world. He's right, dude. 100%. The whole point of this game, they literally make a gameplay out of it, a gameplay mechanic out of it, is to create relationships with characters that are rewarding you with gameplay stuff. And like, yeah, that's great. That's a great way to incentivize it. But you don't even really realize that as you're like going through all these places and visiting all these characters and all this kind of stuff, they're trying to get you to fall in love with this world. They really are. They're trying to get you to fall in love with these extremely quirky characters and all these crazy conversations that characters have. Like the NPCs in this game have so much charm, it's nuts, like rivaling that of a friggin' Yakuza game, right? Clearly that's also a bond between like the player and the world, the player and the locations, the player and the characters in game. And I think they did a pretty effective job because people go through actual depression when the game is over. At least some do. With that being said, yeah, I don't know where they're going to lean in the next part and what the next theme of the next game is going to be, but I will say, just in terms of like game feel and what your feelings are of that game about the experience, Rebirth leaves a much different impression than Remake. I loved Remake, right? Don't get me wrong. I loved Remake. Great game. But at the same point, I did not feel the same way at the end of Rebirth. It just felt like entirely different. It felt like it was entirely a different kind of experience that I was playing and enjoying. It felt very controlled, very tight, you know, in part 1. And then part 2 was just like vast and open, and you can sort of like sky's the limit what you can do, all this kind of shit, you know? Completely different feel at the end of that game. Some people kind of liked how refined the first part was, because the first part's set around a lot of really big set pieces. And then the second part has big set pieces, but the plot doesn't really come around because we're waiting for part 3. So I get it, you know? I get it. I get like why people feel that way and why I kind of felt that way, but ultimately appreciate it because I think at the end of this thing, regardless of the next game having a lot of borrowed elements from this game, I think the next part is going to feel also really unique. I think that's them also pulling back a little bit on the overuse on like large scale environment checklisting, sort of, you know, going from this thing to the other. I don't even know if they're gonna have the typical like Ubisoft tower shit. The entire Chadley element of the game where Chadley is, you know, sort of doing shit and telling you what to do all over the place. I don't know if that's gonna be there. I really don't. I think they might have something much more organic in terms of exploration, but maybe just less stuff overall. That's about it. I think that wraps up the post, yeah. So there's just more stuff that they're talking about, more dedication to airship stuff. I personally feel that we're going to get an update on FF7 Rebirth, like officially. I'm sorry, FF7 Part 3 officially as early as the summer of this year. I'm not even kidding. Where sometime around mid 2025, no shit, we could get at some point next year, did they say this year? Next year, 2025, a small teaser. And that teaser wouldn't be much. It would be pretty much confirmation of the game's existence, the title, maybe something like that, and like a very, very small tease. But a year after that, 2026, the giant gameplay reveal. The same way they did for Rebirth, a huge gameplay reveal 1 year later, which is just like, hey, here it is. And from that 1 year point, which is effectively summer-ish 2026, all gas, no brakes till 2027. And that's where I think the game is actually launching. It'd be cool. You gotta think like, oh, but that's so short, you know, all that kind of stuff. My dude, they likely will have already had 2 years of development time by the time mid 2025 hits. They could have potentially had 2 years of development time just on this game alone. That's where my thought process is at. And you know what also? That gives us plenty of time to eventually get Tifa and Tekken.